Hello, good morning, Dr. Song. I think you already in the Zoom meeting room. Good morning, Dr. Song. Hello, good morning or good afternoon in New Zealand.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, Professor Atika.
Just call me Atika.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too. And thank you for your willingness to give us lecture today in Saturday.
Well, this is okay, and yeah, so many students you have. Yeah,
and we're still waiting more. We have around 147 students that will join.
Really? Well, I know Indonesia is it's a negeri besar, but 150, that's a lot.
It's in one academic year. They're in the same year 2022, so in the third semester.
I see. Because here in New Zealand, we are kecil.
Yeah.
so our so our class, if we have 70 people, that's a very big.
Okay.
But you have 150, that's a really big class.
You will present your own PowerPoint, or we will help you to present?
Oh, no, I will do it, and I will actually share it. Let me try to share.
Yeah, you can try. I already make you co-host.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it clearly.
how about now? Can you still see it?
No.
No, I
We
see. Okay,
just
so now,
see leave.
okay, now it is on my this monitor.
Yeah, this one.
I don't know how I can move this to this monitor. Okay. Just one sec, and I will try to but it's okay. I can do this. I can use this monitor. Okay, so this is totally okay. Now you can see the monitor and myself. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I will make it slideshow.
Yeah, and we can see it.
Yes, slideshow. Do you still can see it?
Yeah, we can still.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah. So,
but
so
can we wait for maybe around 3 to 5 minutes more? So
sure. So I will disappear for 5 minutes and I will reappear. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. See you soon. Yeah. Okay.
Mahasiswa sekalian, ini sudah 130, tapi saya rasa masih kurang sekitar 17 mahasiswa. Mohon dikondisikan masing-masing komting untuk ngoyak-ngoyak teman-temannya untuk bisa bergabung di Zoom.
Oke. Ya. Mungkin kita 2 menit lagi ya. 2 sampai 5 menit lagi ya Mbak Lilis ya.
Oke, Mbak.
Oke. Dr. Song, excuse me, could you maybe
yes,
turn
yeah.
off the screen first?
Oh, so you want me to turn off the screen, yeah?
Yeah.
I see. Okay, just 1 second.
Start the MC so we can, yeah.
Is it okay now? Just 1 second.
Can you please stop share the screen first?
Oh, okay. Oh, share screen. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. I will stop sharing. Yes, I did.
We can see you more clearly before your lecture.
I see. Okay.
And Dr. Song, beside 147 students, we also present here several lecturers from the Sociology and Anthropology Education Study Program. And we have Bu Lilis. Actually, Bu Lilis is the lecturer from the whole class that we use Eurasia lecture series. We use class of Bu Lilis.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Song.
Oh, okay. Just one minute. Let me try to show up again. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
I see you very clear now.
Oh, see. Yeah. Okay. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Dr. Song.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Professor. You are Professor Harta.
Yes, my full name is Hartati Sulistiorini.
Yeah,
But you can call me Bu Lilis as a stage name.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Maybe we can start, Bu Atika and Bu Arsi. Nadia as a host of this lecture.
Okay, we can start. We will start from the MC, Master of Ceremony, Dr. Song, before you deliver your speech. We will officially start the lecture for today. Nadia, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
So
All right. Thank you for this opportunity. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and best wishes to all of us. The Honorable Dr. Atika Wijaya, as the Coordinator of Sociology and Anthropology Education Study Program, the Honorable Invited Speaker Dr. Changzoo Song, Senior Lecturer of Faculty of Art ASEAN Studies, the University of Auckland, New Zealand, the Honorable, all the lecturers who have taken the time to attend today's RSL Lecture Series 2023 second session, and all our fellow students who were present in today's lecture. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Nadia as a Master of Ceremony for today's lecture. Okay, before we enter the tour of the event, I will read out the agenda on this morning. Our agenda today is as follows. First, opening. Second, welcoming speech from Coordinator of Sociology and Anthropology Education Study Program. Third, presentation material by Dr. Changzoo Song. Next, the question and answer session. Ladies and gentlemen, before starting lecture this morning, it would be good for us to read prayers according to our respective religions. Prayers begins. Okay, prayers is over. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the next session is a welcoming speech from the Coordinator of Sociology and Anthropology Education Study Program to Dr. Atika Wijaya. The change is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Nadia. Good morning, Dr. Changzoo Song. I hope I spell your name correctly also.
Bagus sekali.
Ya, terima kasih. And also selamat pagi semuanya, teman-teman, dan juga yang saya hormati Bapak Ibu dosen yang sudah bergabung di Zoom pagi ini. Hari ini adalah pertemuan atau seri kedua kita Eurasia Lecture Series tahun 2023. Dan kali ini kita kedatangan Dr. Changzoo Song dari ASEAN Studies, the University of Auckland, New Zealand, ya, negara yang jauh ya dari kita, yang sangat indah gitu. I remember that one of my dream is to continue my doctoral studies in New Zealand, but unfortunately I cannot do it. But I got accepted in the Netherlands. Yeah. Because New Zealand is very beautiful country, I think. Gitu. Jadi sangat senang sekali, gitu ya, teman-teman hari ini bisa berkesempatan mendengarkan lecture, gitu ya, materi dari Dr. Changzoo Song dari New Zealand. Beliau adalah pakar, gitu, ahli di bidang Asian Studies ya, East Asian Studies terutama. Jadi mungkin teman-teman sekarang zamannya itu mungkin Korean Wave gitu ya, ataupun Japanese anime dan sebagainya. Nah kali ini Dr. Song akan menyampaikan tentang political side gitu ya. Mungkin selama ini teman-teman tahu hiburannya saja, tapi hari ini kita bisa lebih mengenal what's behind gitu ya, bagaimana mungkin kita dapat menerima berbagai melihat berbagai hiburan, produk media dan lain sebagainya, tapi bagaimana relasi negara-negara di Asia khususnya East Asian gitu. Jadi silahkan, kemarin mungkin materi sudah disampaikan, kita simak lecture hari ini, dan once again thank you very much Dr. Song for your your willingness to deliver your speech in Universitas Negeri Semarang, even though it's online, but maybe next time we invite you to come to Semarang if we have more opportunity. Ya, oke, sekali lagi terima kasih untuk teman-teman. Silahkan menyimak perkuliahan hari ini. Semoga apa yang kita terima hari ini sangat bermanfaat. Terima kasih juga Bu Lilis sudah mendampingi kelas Eurasia Lecture Series ini dengan 3 kelas mahasiswa Sosiologi Indonesia. Terima kasih juga Bapak Ibu dosen yang sudah hadir di Zoom ini. Sekian, terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Atika Wijaya, for the welcoming speech given. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we start, we will enter the next session by introducing our speaker. Allow me to read the curriculum vitae of Dr. Changzoo Song. Before that, I'm sorry I cannot share screen the curriculum vitae of Dr. Changzoo Song because my trouble signal. So I can just read the curriculum vitae of Dr. Changzoo Song. Dr. Changzoo Song obtained his PhD at the University of Hawaii at Manual Political Science for Asian Studies. Then in 1995, Dr. Changzoo Song served as lecturer in Comparative Politics for Asian Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manua. And in 1999, served as lecturer in Comparative Politics at the Studies University Riga, Latvia. Okay, and next the award received was the 1998 till 1995 as West Central Graduate Fellowship Award for the U.S. Federal Government Postgraduate Study at the University of Hawaii. And then 2009 October, Hanwei Award for the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Sport, Republic of Korea for contribution for the promotion of Korean culture and language in New Zealand. 2012 till 2017, Co-University Program in Korea Studies, Project Director for the University of Auckland, Korea Studies Research and Education. 2017 till 2022, Co-University Program in World Studies, Program Director of the University of Auckland, Korea Studies, Research and Education. Okay, and the next, the other activities of Dr. Changzoo Song. In 1998 till present, Member Association for Asian Studies. 2012 till present, Korea International Society for Korean Studies, Oceania Chapter. 2013 till present, Institute for the Study of Labor in German Research Fellow. 2017 till present, editorial board member Pacific Focus Journal. And 2022 till present, Director Strategic Research Institute for Korean Studies, University of Auckland. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that is the general profile of our speaker today, and there are many more experience he has had, but I'm sorry I can only read a few of Dr. Changzoo Song's many track record. Now, together with our speaker, we will enter the core of the event by discussing and learn with a presentation of material by Dr. Changzoo Song. I hope we can use this occasion for learning something new and gaining some insight. Please prepare your study tools as well. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome our speaker to deliver the presentation. To Dr. Changzoo Song, the change is yours.
Thank you very much for everyone, including Professor Atika and Professor Hartati, Rimi, and everyone, and renowned professors of Universitas Negeri Semarang. And today, I'm very happy to be here. Actually, I really want to visit Semarang someday because I have been to New Zealand, Indonesia 3 times, but only Jakarta and Malang and Bali. And I haven't been to the central part of Java, so someday I want to visit. Anyway, so selamat pagi, everyone. So this morning,
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi, Dokter.
Selamat pagi. Yeah. So this morning to you, and now it is 2 p.m. here in New Zealand. I want to share some of my ideas about the conflict and reconciliation in East Asia. And of course, because we are all Asian people belonging to Asian continent, we know each other's history, but East Asia is, of course, different from Southeast Asia or Central Asia or South Asia. So, I will concentrate on the 3 major countries in East Asia. We call it CJK, which is China, Japan, Korea. So now I will share my slide with you. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. And so, this is what happened frequently in China and Japan and Taiwan and Korea. So people frequently come to the street and showing their patriotism for their own nation, but often to express their resentment, the hatred of other countries. In China, of course, it is Japan or sometimes Korea, and in Japan, it's sometimes against China, against Korea. Here on top left, you see that the Japanese rightists demonstrating in Tokyo, hoisting the old Japanese the military flag. And here in South Korea, it says no Abe. So this was a few years ago when Mr. Abe Shintaro was Japan's prime minister. And now the Koreans, they toned the Japanese flag. So this is a quite common scenery if you know about East Asia. And so my question is why this happened? These countries have a long history compared to any nations in Southeast Asia or especially Southeast Asia. These countries have at least maybe 1,500 years of history each, China, Japan, Korea, if not longer. But they are very hostile often against each other. However, this is relatively new. If we understand this started from mostly 19th century, late 19th century. So I will give you a brief explanation why these countries, people show resentment against each other and how can we solve this problem? Because this problem is very important. If these countries are small and weak and not that important in global politics or global economy, it may not be a serious problem. But these countries are, first of all, very big. China is, as you know, the #1 in terms of population. Now it is the 2nd largest economy, and Japan used to be 2nd largest economy until 2010. And now Japan is the 3rd largest economy in the whole world. And South Korea itself, not even including North Korea or Taiwan, South Korea itself is about 10th largest economy in the world. And this is a place where technological innovations have been happening in the last few decades. And they occupy extremely important position in global economy. Okay? And that's why we have to pay particular attention to these countries. So these 5 topics are what I will talk about today. So first of all, we will briefly go through the history of these 3 countries, which share almost the same civilization, and why these shared civilization countries, they came to have such a big conflict ever since late 19th centuries and until today. And then also we will talk about in modern day, how these countries created, they turned the old countries into new modern nation state. Like Indonesia, for example. Indonesia, the Indonesian leaders and people were very smart, and when they established new nation out of such a diverse population scattered all around from Sumatra and all the way to Irian Jaya, they invented a marvelous ideology, as we all know, that Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, the unity within diversity. And so these three countries of Japan, China, Korea, they also had to do this in the late 19th century. Now, in this process, they invented their own story, the national story, which is a history, the interpretation of a past history, projecting to the future. And now a lot of today's conflict is developed in this period, in this process of building modern nation state. So that's what we will talk about. And then eventually in the end, I will talk about how they see themselves as a victim. Okay? Because again, in this victim story, a lot of conflict is hidden. Okay, so after this lecture, you will have understood all the things that I mentioned here, okay? Okay, so first of all, we all know that the China, Japan, Korea, they share same civilization. And it is quite obvious when you see Koreans and Japanese, Chinese. It's virtually impossible to distinguish. Like looking at my face, there's no way for anyone to tell me if I was orang China or orang Japan or orang Korea, okay? It's because we all look alike. Unlike Indonesia, which has such a diverse population. And what was traditionally these countries, what kind of relationship did they have? Okay, so that's what I will talk about very soon. And even though they shared so many things, like for example, people here, like Indonesians and other people, they all eat rice. Of course, in northwestern part of China, actually that's a great chunk of Chinese people, they didn't have rice until very recently, because traditionally northwestern China, where originally Chinese civilization was born, there was no rice, there was only wheat. Okay, so these people in northern part of China, they eat mostly noodles and the buns, which is similar to bread. But anyway, they all share wet rice agriculture. Okay, Japan and Korea, they eat same kind of rice, which is very sticky. And Indonesians don't like that rice, I believe. But you have to use only that rice to make a sushi or Korean kimbap, because they are very sticky. Meanwhile, the southern China, they eat rice same as Indonesian, long grain rice. Anyway, but they share this same culture. And in old days, they all shared Chinese writing system. And also, not only that, ideas. Buddhism, originally from India, spread throughout China, came to Korea and Japan. And also Confucianism, which came out of China, and that idea and philosophy was widely shared. But as I say, recently, from late 19th and until today, these countries are very much hostile against each other. And so let me quickly explain that why. As I said, for over nearly 2,000 years, China, Korea, Japan, they shared similar institutions, a similar form of government, values, ideas, and customs. And as I say, they shared Chinese writing system, and also the ancestor worship and other religious traditions such as Buddhism, Confucianism, and so on. And another thing that particularly East Asians share is soybean. Soybean biologically originated from northern part of Korean Peninsula and Manchuria. But this soybean, unlike anywhere else, even in Asia, was very, very important food. Now, soybean makes, first of all, Japanese miso, or Koreans call it doenjang. Okay, so without soybean, Japanese and Koreans can't really have a breakfast, because in Japan every morning you eat rice with miso shiru, or Koreans call it doenjang guk. Okay, and that's how your tofu is made. Tofu can be made traditionally only from soybean. And also, these are the people who use chopstick. Okay, the chopstick culture begins Japan. I mean, chopstick culture is very much confined. Not all Asians use chopstick, as we know. So chopstick include Japan, Korea, China, and only part of Vietnam. Once you cross the mountain that divide Vietnam from Cambodia and Laos, then you go further west, then chopstick disappeared. And of course, because people there, they have a much better tool than chopstick, the finger. Okay, so this finger starts from Cambodia, Laos, and they will go all the way to India and Pakistan. Okay. Until you go Europe. But anyway, so, and also there was something called the tributary system, which I will explain in East Asia. So first of all, if you visit Korea and Japan and China and have a meal, you will find this. They all use a chopstick, but chopsticks are different. The Chinese chopstick, Korean chopstick, and Japanese chopstick, they're all different. And as you see, the Chinese chopstick, both China and Japan, they use wood or bamboo wood, yeah, mostly. But Korea is the only country where they use metal. And Chinese chopsticks are very long, longer than Koreans and that of Japan. So Chinese are longest. Korean chopsticks are slightly shorter, but Japan is even shorter. The ending is also different. Chinese is not very sharp, and my Korean ones are a little bit sharp, but Japanese are very sharp. Okay, and this is there are reasons why. Because in Japan, when you eat fish, you need to remove the small bones from fish, and this kind of chopstick is very good for Japan. And Koreans also eat a lot of fish. Actually, per capita fish consumption in Korea is even bigger than Japan. Okay, so Koreans are very much fish-loving people. But anyway, the reason why in China and Japan they use wood, but why only Koreans didn't use wood? Saya tidak tahu. However, there are some clues. Korea, in ancient Chinese record, it says the southern part of Korea, they produce a lot of metal. Okay? So that's why in Korea there was a lot of metal, and that's why the chopsticks are made with metal, and also spoons. These are all from Korea. Japan and Chinese meal, they don't use much spoon, if you realized. I mean, they give you spoon. In China, ceramic spoon, or these days a plastic spoon, but that's only for when you eat soup or noodle with soup. But in Japan, they don't give you a spoon generally, and even soup, you hold the bowl and using chopstick, you eat like that. Okay, but in Korea, always they use spoon. So why Koreans use spoon and the spoon disappeared from China and Japan? Of course, it has something to do with what they were eating. Okay, so Koreans always need a lot of soup, very hot, and you cannot hold a soup bowl because it's just too hot. And so that's why they still use a spoon. While in Japan, the bowls are made out of also wood, and wood doesn't convey any heat. So you can hold it, and that's why you just drink out of it. So this is very much shared. However, it doesn't mean that their culture is very, very similar to each other. No. First of all, the languages are totally different. It's not just different, it is totally different. Chinese language has a tonal language. It's a tone. Okay? They have a tone. But Japanese and Korean language, we don't have any tone. And these three countries all have their own writing system, even though in old days, they share the Chinese writing system here, as you see, but Japan still uses some Chinese writing system, but Japanese invented hiragana and katakana already in medieval era, and this is Japanese. And of course, Koreans invented their own alphabet quite late, but 16th century, and this is Korean. So the language totally different from each other. Except Japanese and Korean, they have a lot of connections between these two languages. The grammar is almost identical. Okay? And also, even political tradition, a little bit different in China, very powerful emperor. And in Korea, the king's power was very much shared with the noble class. Okay? And in Japan, there was an emperor, but emperor lost power, and the power was very much decentralized by the head of samurai, which were called daimyos. Okay, and also social manners and bowing, and it looks similar maybe to outsiders, but they are very different. And clothing, what they wear, how they wear is also very different. Okay, so that should be our understanding. These countries, they may look alike, but they are very different. And if you compare East Asia with Europe, Europeans are very similar to each other. Doesn't matter, from Portugal all the way to Russia, they are same because their language belong only to one language family, Indo-European language family. And that's why Europeans, they can learn each other's language very quickly. Okay? But it's not true in these countries. Even food, very different. Compared to Europeans, again, from Portugal all the way to Russia, they eat virtually same thing, bread and salad and meat. And what they use is also same, fork and knife. Okay? But in East Asia, even though they look alike, they are very different. You know, raw fish is not consumed by Chinese at all. The Chinese never knew about sashimi. They didn't eat even today, but today is slightly increasing. The wealthy people started with raw fish, but this raw fish eating habit was only confined to Japan and Korea. And even today, if you look at religions, very different. In China, communist country, and virtually no religion is recognized. But if there is any, there's still a little bit Buddhism and Taoism, Confucianism, if you consider it as a religion. Okay? But in Korea, there are a lot of Christians. About 25% of Koreans claim that they are Christians. Okay? In Japan, even though Christianity came so early, even in the end of the 16th century, the Christianity already came to Japan, but today there is only 1% of Japanese who are Christians. And the great majority of Japanese are multi-religious, like Buddhism and Shintoism and so on. Okay, so anyway, this shows how these three countries are different. Now, this is tiger, of course. I mean, but these tigers in Korea and northern part of China, they are different from the tigers you find in Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia is very tropical. But these are Siberian tigers. They are much bigger. Okay, and in Korea, the entire country had so many tigers, and he used to be the #1 killer of human beings, because there are so many tigers. But interesting, in Korea, in traditional story, tigers are depicted as a funny animal sometimes. Anyway, here, this tiger and rabbit, they are smoking together. Okay? But now this is a tiger painted by Japanese painters, because in Japan there was no tiger. Okay? Even today there's no tiger. And they only heard about tiger from Koreans, so they imagine that tiger must be ferocious, very, of course it's a ferocious animal, so they depict tiger this way, have never seen tiger. Okay, but anyway, ancient Chinese record show that, because China was the biggest country in the world, by the way, so especially the Tang Dynasty, a lot of the countries, they sent delegates, including, I think, Indonesia, from the kingdoms in Indonesia before. This was before Islamic era. But here you see that ancient, they depicted, and here's the Japanese delegates here. Okay, and then this is Goguryeo, one of the three kingdoms in Korea, and then this is Shilla, one of the three kingdoms in the southern part of. So this is Korean, and this is Korean, and this is Japanese. Okay, but interestingly, you see that some delegates are wearing shoes, but Japanese delegates are not wearing shoes. Okay, because Japan, relatively far away from China, didn't really get the civilization as early as Koreans. Okay? But anyway, these countries, if we look at history, of course, there was a big war. There were big wars between these three countries. However, compared to the rest of the world, this belligerence, the wartime, was very short, only brief, and not many. Okay, and there are some wars, of course, horrible wars, but compared to Europe, especially, these countries have lived relatively peacefully among themselves, and especially for the almost 300 years between 17th and 19th centuries, there were no undisrupted peace among these three countries, which is rather rare in history. Okay, however, this changed. And after late 19th century, these countries will have a tremendous wars, as often the war became global war, the world war. Okay? And now why this happened? Because this traditional peace, relatively peaceful relationship, was disturbed by the mid-19th century, when Westerners finally arrived to East Asia. Especially, they already arrived in China after Indonesia and Vietnam and China. They arrived, but China was powerful, so they could not colonize China. But instead, they were dividing small part of China's territory, and they started to colonize. And then they came to Korea and Japan. But these two countries were the last countries to be colonized or never colonized by Westerners simply because they were too far and they didn't have, unlike Indonesian archipelago, in Korea, when Westerners come and there's nothing that they really want from Korea, okay? Because Korea, we don't have any spice, okay? We don't have nice fruits, tropical fruits, and so on, and coffee. No, you can't grow coffee in Korea or Japan, okay? But Japan, however, was opened not by Europeans, but by Americans. Why? Because the world is round. Europeans came from England, from Europe, toward the east. So they came to Middle East and they came to Pakistan, India, conquering India and colonizing this land. And then they further come south to Indonesia and so on and so on. Okay. And then they reached China and they were, the Opium Wars, they occurred. And then they came to Korea. But Japan's case, it was too far from Europeans because this is the eastern end of Eurasian continent. So instead of being conquered by Europeans, another power came to Japan. And that power was America. Why Americans? Because America is a big country, okay? And when Americans started to develop North America from New York area, New York, Boston, and Virginia, and they were migrating to the west, and then eventually they arrived in California. And they built big cities such as San Francisco and Los Angeles, and Americans came from San Francisco to Japan. So they, rather than Europeans who came eastward, the Americans came westward. So from American perspective, the first country they discover or they arrive in Asia, that was no other than Japan, because Japan is the first country from the other side of the Pacific. So now this was the time when these three countries began to diverge from this old shared civilization, because all these three countries had to do many things. For example, to protect itself, you have to industrialize. You have to build modern nation states. Okay? And if you fail, East Asians knew very well that they will be like India, or before India, they will be like Indonesians, they will be like Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and China, the southern China, that they will be colonized and they will be exploited by Europeans, Western powers. And so Japan did the best job here. But anyway, let's start with China. The three countries had exactly the same fate, and Chinese did quite a bit. They tried to understand about this new enemies, the Europeans, their civilization, their science and technology, idea, philosophy, but Chinese didn't believe that they were the best country in the world, especially their ideas like Confucianism and so on. So they thought, we don't need to learn everything. The Europeans are good, better than us, only in terms of weapon. So that's why here, the Chinese, the Qing dynasty, they try to learn the Western, adopt Western military system without changing Chinese idea. Okay, but of course it has a limitation. You can't industrialize, modernize your country without changing the idea. The Chinese case really proved that. But Koreans were even worse. They tried to modernize the country, but they had exactly the same idea that East Asian civilization is superior to that of Western civilization, not understanding the Westerners are not just weapons and science and technology. It's more than that. They have a very systematic way of looking at the world and understanding cosmos, understand this and modern science and philosophy and so on. Okay? But not knowing that, the Koreans tried to do a little bit, but there were a lot of people who were opposing changing the system. Okay, so Korea failed and eventually colonized by Japan. Okay, and as I said, Japan started much earlier. They understood Westerners much earlier than Koreans or Chinese in many regards, because Japan was continuously trading with the Orang Belanda, the Dutch people. Dutch people from Batavia, which is Jakarta, of course, they came to Nagasaki, and the Japanese government, Tokugawa government, allowed Dutchies to live in Nagasaki in a separate island, small island, which is connected by small road and bridge to the land, and they were confined there. But Dutchies brought a lot of Western civilization to Japan, like medicine, for example. And of course, before Dutch, the Portuguese sold the gun, the musket, to Japanese, and that's why Japanese army became so powerful, because they were fighting against each other in Japan during the Civil War. So Japanese had a very powerful army. But anyway, this powerful army would continuously decline, because during the Edo era, the Tokugawa era, that the peace prevailed. And this was a time when East Asia, nearly for 300 years, these countries had peace. But anyway, the Japanese realized that, looking at the Opium Wars, what Europeans did in Indonesia and India and so on, and they successfully changed the old system into new system. Now their idea was that, gosh, we have to learn everything from Westerners, not just their technology, that doesn't work. Okay, we have to also understand their religion, their philosophy, and so on and so on. So that's how Japan became a big power. Okay, so if we look at this in a context, that when these countries, East Asian countries, enjoying probably the highest level of technology and civilization for a while in human history, at least until 16th, 17th century, China and Japan and Korea was much wealthier than Western countries. It was only after the Western religious reformation and also the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution in European history that East Asian countries started to lose in relative terms. Okay? But anyway, now they had to survive. And how they survive? And here in this process, they started to think how we can meet this challenge. And that idea was different from each other. And that's why Japan succeeded, but China and Korea failed. And once, when Japan became the only successful country that was successfully westernized and industrialized, probably Japan was the only example outside of Western Europe in terms of the achieving industrialization and modernization so successfully. Okay, now Japan became very powerful country. They became even bigger power than many European powers eventually by the early 20th century. Okay, and at that time in Japan, the intellectuals, and also in Korea and China, some intellectuals thought that, okay, because Japan is a so powerful country now, we should work together, and Japanese should help Koreans and Chinese to modernize these countries so that we East Asians can protect entire Asia. There was that kind of idea. Of course, later this idea changed to Japanese imperialism. But anyway, so there was a brief period when these three countries, there was an idea that intellectuals believed that they should help each other. No, that didn't happen. Now, the first big war that Japan fought was China, the Qing China. And now why Japan fought China is that eventually Japan realized how powerful Japan was, how successful Japan was, and now European countries cannot really invade Japan except Russia. Russians in Indonesia, you may not see it, but in the eastern end of Eurasia continent, Russians already came and they took land, Manchuria, and they reached the end of the Western Pacific, and they established Vladivostok in 1860, which was used to be ruled by Manchus. The Manchus are the people who conquered China in 17th century and who established the Qing dynasty, the most powerful dynasty ever existed in Chinese territory. Okay, so but Japan and Russia, there was a territorial dispute as well. So Japan was very much worried, but China, failing modernizing itself, became weaker and weaker, and it was colonized partly by Western powers, including Russia. And that worried Japan. So Japan first fought China. This is the Japanese depicting that war, the first Sino-Japanese war we call, and this happened in 1894 and ended within a year in 1905. Here in eastern part of China, with the Dalian, which is a big port city that leads any marine, the naval powers to the interior area to Manchuria. There, the Chinese soldiers were captured, and here you see that what Japanese soldiers do. One by one, they were brought in, and then their head would be cut. Okay, so you see here heads and things. Now, this is a Japanese depiction because in those days, there were not that many cameras. Okay, but anyway, so very interesting. This kind of brutal, the treatment of Chinese soldiers. Of course, there is a context here, because when Japanese troops occupied finally that port, they found many Japanese soldiers who were captured by Chinese troops. They were severely damaged. Their body, after they were killed, their bodies were damaged. You know, the fingers were cut, arms were cut, and legs were cut, and so on. And that's why they were very angry, and they decided to kill every Chinese soldiers. Now, this happened in Malaysia and Singapore, by the way. When Japan, now we are jumping to Second World War. When Japan occupied Singapore and Malaysia, British soldiers were captured together with a small number of Dutchies and so on, and also a large number of Sikh Indians, because Sikh Indians were serving in British Army throughout the colonial period. So here, this is against international law, of course, that the POWs were also punished in this manner. Okay. However, Japanese were not always like this. Previous war, now this war is Russo-Japanese war. When Japanese fought Russians, they treated Russians very, very nicely, very interesting. And compared to here, now this war happened in 1894 and 95, okay? And Russo-Japanese war happened exactly 10 years later. 10 years later, Japanese, when they were treating Chinese like this, Japanese were treating the nurses, were helping, they're carrying the wounded Russian soldiers, and some even married, and all the Russians killed, the Japanese erected monument. Okay, of course, this was because international public opinion, especially in Western world, was very, very negative after they saw this. Okay, so Japan decided to show international community that we are also like Europeans, we are gentlemen. Okay, but anyway, the war ended. Now we are jumping after the war. But you all know that how Japan was defeated. Japan established a huge empire, including Indonesia, Malaysia, and all Southeast Asia, and even Papua New Guinea. This is General MacArthur, who was leading the Pacific forces of US, and they decide to drop atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and now that Japan surrendered without any condition. Okay, so when after that, because in Japan, when they were creating modern nation state, they made Japanese emperor as a god, and that religion is so-called state Shintoism. Okay, and that's why so many Japanese, they killed themselves for the emperor. Okay, and now General MacArthur meet the Emperor Hirohito here in September 1945 in Tokyo at his office, and Japanese emperor came, and this is General MacArthur. He's not wearing necktie or anything, and while the Japanese emperor was very politely, and General MacArthur made him declare that to his people, to all Japanese, that I am not a god. Okay, and then the emperor system was totally lost its power in Japan. But in Japan, they erected, there are many, the statue of General MacArthur, even though he was an enemy. And here, what it says is General MacArthur, he is the father of Japan's democracy. Okay, so interesting. Now, anyway, after the war, the Western powers, United Nations forces, they run this military trial, and the Class A criminals, the war criminals, were all executed. But Emperor himself, even though Emperor was the highest person in Japan, he was saved. Okay. Anyway, so after this war, that Asians hate Japanese, of course, and particularly Koreans, who were directly colonized and ruled by Japanese for nearly 37 years, but also Chinese, against which Japan launched the second Sino-Japanese War, and that really devastated China. And actually that war helped today's China to be a communist country. Okay, this is a long story, but anyway, because of Japan's role during the war, the nationalist Chiang Kai-shek's army became very weak, and meanwhile, the Mao Zedong's communist force could reserve their power, hiding and avoiding Japanese. But anyway, so that was the result. Okay, and after the war, Second World War, Japan very quickly became very wealthy country. And now that's behind it was mostly the Korean War. After the war, very soon, China was continuing its civil war between the nationalists and communists. But in Korea, also, the country was divided between communists and whatever capitalist or Democrats, and Korea had a big war from 1950 to 1953. And during that time, now that was the beginning of the Cold War, the Americans decided to make Japan wealthy. because they had to protect Asian countries from communism. Okay, so now Japan became a very wealthy country, but as Japan became a global economy, now they need to be more gentle, and they need to be show the world that we are different from the old, previous before the war, compared to before the war. And there was really many apologies. Emperor Hirohito, before he died, he apologized to China and Korea and other countries. And his son, Emperor Akihito, now he is, he's still alive, but now his son is Naruhito is emperor. Now he retired. And also, like this so-called sex slaves or comfort women, and that issues, the Japanese politicians apologized. Okay, but then again, now East Asian, well, actually global power relationship is changing. Now China became so wealthy and so powerful, and now this gives great threat and sense of threat and shiver to East Asians, especially because Korea and Japan, they are so close to China. And also, as you know, that all the Southeast Asian countries feel that threat of Chinese neighbor power and so on. And so Japan started to change now. Like especially at his time, Shinzo Abe's time, Japan showed very clear sign that old rightism was returning to Japan. And Americans, they support this to a certain degree because Americans cannot now keep the global peace by itself. Because now in Europe, the Ukraine and Russia, for example, and in Asia, China and North Korea and so on. So they want countries, its allies like Japan and South Korea to be strong. Okay? So in this context, anyway, the things are changing again. Meanwhile, in China, interesting that if you visit China, and this is a TV drama, okay? There are so many TV dramas in China, but by government order, you have to show this so-called anti-fascist dramas and films a certain time of the day. Okay, so whenever you sit and eat delicious noodle at Chinese restaurant, you would see this kind of scene. Okay, now this is heroic Chinese are fighting the Japanese during the war. Okay, but anyway, and also in China, the nationalism is rising, and same nationalism is rising in Japan, but also Korea. Okay. For many reasons, okay, because of past history, but also the turbulent time that seems to be coming to East Asia. So, so all these countries, for them, how they look at the history became a huge issue. Like China, relying on the war they fought with Japan, now they educate young people with very strong patriotism and nationalism. Okay, and also that was going on in South Korea as well, and in Japan as well. Okay, so and countries like North Korea, for example, from the very beginning, the North Korea was always anti-Japan, and this is their poster. And for North Koreans, the South Koreans, and Americans and Japanese, they are always enemy. Okay? And here, the Americans are the #1 enemy. And North Korea claimed that that's why they are developing nuclear weapon, because of Americans. Okay? So this kind of using past history, all these countries, including Japan, now that makes every country the people more nationalistic. And here, this Japanese rightist in front of the famous Yasukuni Shrine, where the Second World War, the Pacific World War, the Japanese victims are buried. And now they come there and they urge Japanese to go back to this old days, not forgetting how brave Japanese soldiers were and how great Japanese military was. And also they say the way how in Japan, the way how we teach our history, past history to our children today is too negative, they think. So here is what it says is that when Japanese children see what happened during the war, what Japanese did during the war, now when they know it, now they are shocked and they feel very bad about themselves. Okay, and this rightist claim that this is bad for education, so let's not teach them. Okay, so that's why they were changing textbooks and so on. And of course, that gives that renews the sense of a threat for Koreans and Chinese and politicians in Korea, China, Japan. They are ready to use that kind of opportunity. Okay? But Japan themselves, now gradually, they are not for China, Chinese, Koreans, and other Asians. Japan was an aggressor. But in Japan, the public discourse is changing, has been continuously changing, and depict themselves, we are also victims. So here, this is Hiroshima, right after the atomic bomb. You see that everything was destroyed. And now this beautiful manga, animation, and this is a really beautiful story. I mean, if you watch it, you just shed tears, because after the atomic bomb here in Hiroshima, this brother and her little younger sister, they survived. They lost their parents and they didn't have any food and so on. So this is a really sad story. But this kind of story, in a macro level, it gives Japanese people, it deepens their sense of victim. So we Japanese are also victims. So all these three countries, they compete in a sense that we are the victims. Okay, so in this kind of a victim competition, the things do not get better at all. So anyway, so I use this. This is the famous German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He used this term, resentment. Well, he used the French term, sentiment, which means resentment, hostility. And he studied about it, and he said, if you hate someone, okay, because of whatever reason, in our daily life, we hate other people. Like, Indonesians are so nice people, so they don't hate other people too much. But except when there's a Batik war with the Malaysians, when Malaysians claim the Batik is ours and Indonesians say, no, this is ours, okay? So this kind of small scale, any kind of hatred actually is bad for the person who hates. That's how this the Friedrich Nietzsche and other philosophers in Germany they discovered. Okay, so this, if you hate someone, actually it doesn't do any harm or anything bad to that person. However, it hurts you first and it stops you from growing further. Okay, so this idea that if someone has sustained his hatred, it hurts the person who hates for more than the other person who is hated. And it also, it enslaves the person who hates by preventing his or her emotional growth. from progressing beyond the sense of pain. But anyway, of course, in Germany's case, after the Second World War, it was quite different. And we all know that Germany total the forgiveness they were begging to other Europeans right after the war. And this is a famous the event in 1970. Okay, the German chancellor, while visiting Poland was the first victim of German aggression. Okay, especially the Jewish people in Poland, they were massacred right here. And that's why this monument was erected later after the war. And when the German chancellor visiting Poland without any plan, this was not in the plan. Suddenly he went here. This was, I think this was a February, so still some snow, some water here, snow melting from snow. And he suddenly knelt down and he started to pray. Actually, no one heard what he was saying. But right after, the newspapers started to report about this. It says this is a Willy Brandt, by the way, the name of the chancellor. The Willy Brandt, Mr. Willy Brandt, Willy Brandt was praying for the victims, the Jews who were killed here, and apologizing them, and so on and so on. Okay, actually, no one heard what he said, but this was the report. And that was because Europeans, including French and British and Polish and so on, they are so mature in a sense that they, by reporting this widely, Europeans begin to feel that, oh, Germans, they apologized and they are really good people. Okay. Now, this was a beginning of European Union, by the way. Okay. This was needed that Europeans need to be together because, again, for political reasons. After the Second World War, Europe became very weak. And now, Russia, now the Soviet Union is so powerful, and in the world, America is so powerful, but Europe is very weak. So European countries should help each other. So there was that kind of atmosphere in Europe, and this brought Europeans together. Okay? Now this is a more recent one, that same place, all the European leaders get together, and they express that the oneness of Europe. However, in Germany, what was the result? This is called Kniefall. Kniefall means the kneeling down, okay, in English. So he's kneeling down here. When this was reported in Germany, the German reaction was not positive at all. As a matter of fact, many people that this was excessive. Actually, many people also said it was appropriate, but that was minority compared to the people who said, this is why we Germans should do this. Okay, that kind. However, very soon, within a year, when there was a general election, the Willy Brandt party had a landslide victory. Okay, because Germans supported eventually this. Okay, so that's how Germans came together. But in East Asia or Asia, this is still very difficult to think. Do you think the Chinese and Koreans and Japanese will do this? No, that's very, very difficult to imagine still. Okay. Anyway, there are some hopes, however, because with the globalization, now these three countries, Korea, Japan, China, well, of course, Indonesia, Vietnam, and all the countries, they send exchange international students together. So now here, the Asian students, Japanese students, and Singaporean, possibly, and South Korean. This is in China. At their graduation ceremony, they are all together. Okay, and here the Japanese girls, they, because of K-pop and BTS and whatever, so many Japanese young people are traveling to South Korea, and here wearing traditional Korean costume, hanbok, and Japanese girls are, appreciating Korean culture. And also in Japan, even though the economy has been stagnating because of the aging population, in Japan, actually, there are many jobs. You may have heard that Japanese government is bringing a lot of young Indonesians, especially girls, to work in care industry, like, because there are so many old people in Japan, and same in South Korea, and they don't have enough manpower to take care of these old people. So they are bringing a lot of other Asians to work in Japan. And same thing, many South Koreans, they go to Japan and get job. And these are all, this is Japanese companies came to South Korea, and they have this, the workshop. And any Koreans who want to work in Japan, now she was hired by a Japanese company, and so on. And also, now this is an amazing thing that happened in 2014, when there was a lot of anti-Japan demonstrations in China. Now this is in Beijing. Here, this brave Japanese boy holding this. Now what is this? This is a free hug. Hugging is not common in China, right? Especially China. Chinese people don't hug very much. And now he's an international student in China from Japan, and he was holding this. I will give you a free hug. And this was at the time when there was a demonstrations against, what was Japan. And this Chinese man, okay, interestingly, he came and he was giving hug to this Japanese boy. Isn't it beautiful? Okay, so these kind of things are the hope that young people with a different idea, we hope that they will change this this unhealthy, politically used hostility against each other. Okay, so that's what I want to share with you today, and I will stop here. And if you have any question, yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for Dr. Changzoo Song for the insightful presentation you shared with us. And let's give applause for Dr. Song for the useful material that's provided about the East Asia conflict and reconciliation. Okay, Dr. Song, allow me to draw a conclusion from the material that has been processed using Indonesian.
Oh, so again, sorry, I missed that part.
Okay, allow me to draw a conclusion for the material that has been processed using Indonesian. Ya, baik teman-teman, izin menyampaikan sedikit kesimpulan dari Dr. Song yang tadi disampaikan, bahwasanya tadi dijelaskan Asia Timur ada konflik dan juga rekonsiliasi. Nah, peradaban bersama hingga adanya antipati bangunan bangsa negara modern di Jepang. Tadi disebutkan ada 3 negara, yaitu ada Cina, Jepang, dan juga Korea. Materi tadi disampaikan bahwasanya ada hubungan tradisional ketiga negara tersebut, yakni Cina, Jepang, dan Korea. Lalu adanya konflik singkat yang terjadi antara ketiga negara tersebut. Namun, lebih dari 2000 tahun, Tiongkok, Korea, dan Jepang ini hidup damai satu sama lain, mengembangkan institusi, nilai, dan juga adat istiadat yang serupa atau hampir mirip antar ketiga negara tersebut. Nah, terdapat kesamaan juga antar ketiga negara tersebut, diantaranya budaya membungkuk, budaya berjabat tangan, dan juga menggunakan sendok dan sumpit sebagai alat makan. Lalu di sini disebutkan bahwa selama 2000 tahun asimilasi dan adaptasi budaya terjadi periode peperangan atau konflik yang relatif singkat seperti penaklukan Mongol atas Tiongkok dan juga Korea pada abad ke-12 dan upaya gagal berikutnya untuk menaklukkan Jepang oleh pasukan Tiongkok dan Korea yang dipimpin oleh Mongol. Nah, yang mengubah situasi tersebut dikarenakan adanya imperialisme Barat atau pengaruh dari Barat yang mempengaruhi ketiga negara tersebut. Oke, baik. Seperti yang tadi teman-teman lihat di akhir gambar itu, walaupun ada konflik, namun juga ada rekonsiliasi, yaitu ketiga negara tersebut melakukan student exchange. So, alright, we say a big thanks to Dr. Song. Next, there will a question and answer session, which will then be answered directly by Dr. Song. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the presentation of today's material by Dr. Song. Now we will continue the opening the next session, that is question and answer session. To the fellow student who want to ask question, please use the raise hand feature, and the question will then be answered immediately by Dr. Song. Okay, if participant want to ask question, don't forget to mention your name or write a question in commentary column. Okay, seems a lot of students raised their hand here. 7 participants, wait minutes. I can choose. Okay, the first questioner will to Riri Natasha. To Riri Natasha, the time is yours.
All right, thank you, Nadia. My name is Ririn. Before I give my question, I want to thank you for Dr. Changzoo Song for the presentation. I hope the name is not, the pronunciation not wrong. Yeah. Okay, my question is, so the culture of these 3 countries was the Japan, China, and Korean. It's like have a common, like share same culture, like food and the clothes and something like that. So sometimes it's like make a conflict. I don't know if this is like have relate of the presentation today, but I was just like sometimes I may have found and the social media is like conflict about these 3 countries. Like first of all, I found in TikTok some TikToker like make a video that's like how to make a Korean food. This is, and then the Japanese was comment like that's not Korean food, that's a Japan food. It's like that. So, and then another I found in YouTube, there was a K-pop idol who make like video was celebrating their Korean New Year. It's like Chuseok, and then some Chinese some Chinese was comment that's not Korean New Year, that's Chinese New Year. It's like some misconception and like it's like conflict. It's some about that 3 countries was like fight about their culture. My question is that how to say to that person, or like how to overcome that conflict, ask about Japanese, about the Korean, of course about the because it's like same case about Indonesia and Malaysia was have some culture too. So how to overcome that conflict? Of course, as Chinese, Korean, and what's Japan, like that. Thank you. I hope the question is some understand.
Yeah, thank you, Ririn, for the question. And now we invite Dr. Song to answer.
Okay, well, Miss Natasha, thank you very much for your interesting question. That this is because we are living in a digital era, because online and SNS and this kind of digital communication against our initial expectation that this will help us to understand the things better and make us wiser. But actually, in some cases, this communication makes us stupid in a sense. And well, first of all, the culture is shared by all human beings in general, because the only reason why we claim that something is Korean, something is Japanese, something is Chinese, something is Indonesian is because today's world, the world is divided and structured by nation-state system. Okay. Now, this is very new in human history. Even in Europe, this current nation-state system, like France, Germany, United Kingdom, Netherlands, since when people living in that land have that identity that I'm a French, I'm a Dutch, I'm a Indonesian. This is a very, very new, as you know, and very well understood, especially in Indonesia, because this is a relatively very new country. Okay, so, but before this there was no boundary. Okay, and culture can move, especially food, very quickly move, and we learn from each other rather than we generally, invent something. Like many food that is today, like pizza, or pizza is which countries food is pizza? It's mostly American companies, Domino's and Pizza Hut, we know, but it originated from Italy. Okay, but that pizza consumed in America, Domino and Pizza Hut, is it the same as the food that Italians enjoyed in the past? No, they're very different. And also like a Chinese food, for example, that you can enjoy in any Western countries, including in Indonesia, they are only in name. It's a Chinese food, but in China, you don't see that food. Okay, not only China changed, but also that food itself drastically changed in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and that's why that's why they call it peranakan food, for example. Okay, so these things no one can really claim, especially as a member of this new nation state. We cannot claim. However, unfortunately, we are trained and educated to have this very narrow identity as Koreans, as Chinese, as Japanese, as Indonesians, and so on. Okay, that's why we think, oh, this is mine or that's yours, and so on. Okay, however, this is a very new idea in human history, and claiming that this is my food and so on, that's not only true, but also it's a very, very immature. Well, that's what I think.
Thank you, Dr. Changzoo Song.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Changzoo Song. And the next question I feel to Laras Yunita. The change is yours.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Laras Yunita. I want to ask how to create an environment of reconciliation when there are still many people who carry out stereotypes. Thank you.
Oops, sorry, Miss Laras Yunita, can you repeat your question again? Sorry, I missed your question.
Okay, untuk Laras diulangi.
Okay. How to create an environment of reconciliation when there are still many people who carry out stereotypes?
I see. Good question. Well, yeah, indeed, this reconciliation, when people still have a lot of prejudice, is not easy. But really, why it is not easy is because we are not free in our thinking, because we are continuously shaped by external information and education and so on. And if we think, who educate us? That's a very fundamental question, but who educate us in what manner? That's our, depending on which country you are living, in a more democratic country, it is probably more popularly elected government and so on. But in a more dictatorial countries, it is one party or one group of people who have power, and they try to impose their ideas on us. Okay? And that's why we have to overcome this. We have to overcome not only this digital, the very one-sided, controlled, and extreme digital, the contents of digital communication, but also we have to challenge and ask critical questions about our own education. Why they teach us to have certain ideas, for whose interest and for what reason. Okay, so that's why we always have to be awake, and we have to be critical, and we have to think more independently rather than relying on the external ideas that we are continuously exposed. I hope that I answered your question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Changzoo.
All right, thank you, Dr. Changzoo. And excuse me, Dr. Song, should we collect the question first or answer one by one?
Pardon? Sorry.
Okay, excuse me, Dr. Changzoo, should we collect the question first or read or answer one by one? Collect or answer?
The master of ceremony means can we collect maybe 1, 2, 3 question first?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
then
please.
you can give a response, or you may want to answer one by one question.
I see. Okay, well, it's anything that is helpful for you. But I think to save time, maybe we can collect some questions and then answer all together. That will save our time, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Song. So, because there are maybe my student very encouraged to hear that your lecture. So I think there are 7 more questions about what have you explained in this lecture. Thank you for your opportunity, Dr. Song. So Nadia, you can continue this discussion.
Oke, thank you Dr. Changzoo Song. Jadi teman-teman di sini kita akan ada pertanyaannya ditampung terlebih dahulu. Oke, the next opportunity to Yoga Andika Saputra. The change is your question.
Okay, thank you for the given opportunity. My name is Yoga Andika Saputra, but I go by the name Agoy. So, Mr. Song, the East Asian discourse has always been focused mainly on 3 countries, China, Japan, and Korea, and we're often neglecting the minorities living there, such as the Manchu, Hmong, Uyghur, and so on. One of them is the Manchu people, originating from Manchuria or historical region known as Manchukuo. They have a distinct cultural and historical identity separate from other East Asian populations, and having been under the control of several or various dominant forces for centuries, including both Japan and China. how do these Manchu people perceive and experience sentiments toward these two major East Asian nations? Thank you.
Okay, for Yoga Andika Saputra, please write your question in column komentar. And the next question, go to Bilbina Iklima Putri, the change is yours.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity that I just got from the presentation. The three countries, Japan, China, and Korea, were fighting for influence to become the dominant power. This also gives rise to hatred and distrust between the two countries due to historical factors. And my question is, there is a strategy from the three countries to create better integration in the new relation between the three countries in the current era of globalization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bilbina Putri, for this question. Please write your question in column commenter. And the next questioner from Celia Saraswati, the change is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity and good afternoon, Mr. So my question is, what is the role of the global community in helping to address reconciliation between Japan, China, and Korea? And once again, and what's the difference between reconciliation and any other conflict resolution?
Okay, thank you, Celia Saraswati. Please write your question in column komentar. And that is the colleague's question from three questionnaire. I hope Dr. Song can answer three questionnaire from the participant.
I see. So I will answer these three questions very briefly. So the minority views, that's a great. I mean, that's a even though Koreans particularly and Japan and China to a certain degree, they claim that their country is homogeneous. Of course, China officially, China claimed that China is multi-ethnic country because there are 56 ethnic groups. Okay, but Japan and Korea, especially North Korea, very strongly believe their country is homogeneous in the past and today in many regards, but that's not true at all. Again, we are living in this still in the era of nationalism or nation state, and that's why people tend to think that their country is homogeneous and so on. But anyway, there are many ethnic minorities, if not other minorities such as religious minorities and cultural minorities and so on. Right? So unfortunately, their views are not often very well heard, especially when the country is not a democratic country. In democracy, there are more people can raise their voice, but if the country is not a democracy, and of course, this minority's views would be simply unheard and ignored. Okay, and a part of that is especially the Manchus, as you mentioned. Okay, the Manchus are virtually disappearing. Right, they are totally assimilated, but that's not first time in history. The China itself being such a big country, so many ethnic minorities, they simply came to China and they melted away and disappeared. And that's how China as a nation state became such a large country today, which is sad in a sense. In this regard, nationalism itself is not terribly different from imperialism. Okay, the second question, the strategy of bringing these three countries. Yes, that's a very good question, which is always possible. I think we should not rely on our government too much, because the government, the government interest or people in the government their interest is not always correspond to the people's interest. Okay, so people should be more critical about what their government claim or government try to do in this regard. And when people become friends, I think that's the best way for the reconciliation and integration. Okay, so I would focus more on not government. The government level anyway, it will be extremely difficult. Like especially with North Korean Mr. Kim Jong-un, whose family has been ruling North Korea already for 3 generations, and it will be extremely difficult. Okay. However, if we think this more popular level, not government level, it will be easier. And I think our strategy should come from that direction. And the third, the 3 countries' global community responsibility. Yes, that's also very good. I wish these 3 countries, China, Korea, Japan, they should feel more responsibility to the global community and try to be a good neighbor. Okay, it's the same as like when you are living in a society, you want to be a good person. And what is a good person? Good person doesn't claim only his or her interest on others. They yield, they negotiate, they compromise, they listen to others. Okay, so in that regard, I think these 3 countries become more democratic and become more democratic. Being a democratic country doesn't necessarily guarantee this, but trying to more humane. The country become more humane and more understanding, and with more progressive ideas, looking beyond the current national boundary. I hope that I answered to these questions.
Okay, thanks for the answer. And once again, last question given for Hanif Shiva Ifada. The change is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Hanif Shiva. As we know, I want to ask to Dr. Changzoo. As we know that these 3 countries have conflicts and that affects on so many things. My questions: how can China, Japan, and Korea make good relationship after the war for so many aspects like education, economic, and so forth? Whether there is difference between past and now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hanif Shiva Ifada. Please write your question in column commenter. And I'm sorry, Sevia Chitra, you can question to Dr. Changzoo Song. Silakan untuk Sevia juga mendapatkan kesempatan bertanya.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Sevia Chitra. Nice to meet you, Dr. Song. I want to ask about the sexual recession crisis that is occurring in Japan. According to journal I read, it is started the Japanese population will become extinct in 2040, which if this happen will cause the population to decline, which can be seen in village areas where only generation live old. The question is how Dr. Song views this phenomenon for the future, and what is the solution to suppress this recessive sex? Thank you, Dr. Song.
Okay, thank you for the question. And next for Anzar Burhani Haki, the chance is yours to give the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. I would like to ask, Korea is now divided into 2, namely North Korea and South Korea, which have different ideologies. North Korea has a communist ideologies and South Korea has capitalist ideology because of the influence of imperialism from Western countries. How does Mr. Changzoo respond to making the two countries, namely North Korea and South Korea, can Korea become one again, like Germany, which can be reunited? Considering Korea, the two countries also have the same history and culture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the last questioner, given Desita Wulandari, you can explain your question. The change is your.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Nice to meet you, Dr. Song. To ask question, manner in China, Japan, and Korea are similar to those in Indonesian, namely bowing. What is the original names or term for bowing in China, Japan, and Korean? And what is the function of bowing in everyday life? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, for Desita and Azal, you can write that question in column commentar. And for Dr. Changzoo Song, you can answer the fourth question.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I think Miss Destia's question I didn't understand, but if you write it down, I will look at it and I will try to answer. But let me go back to this Japanese population decrease question. Okay, and now yes, that's a very good question. Not only Japan, but also South Korea even worse. The population decrease and aging. And not only that, the fertility rate, unlike in Indonesia, the South Korea's fertility rate is the worst, the lowest in the whole world. Okay, it's one woman has a child now only 0.8. Okay, in Japan, of course, it's also very low, but not as low as that of South Korea. But anyway, this is a common or Japan, South Korea, China to a certain degree. As I said, especially Japan and Korea, they claimed that they are ethnically, racially homogeneous country. But again, these countries show amazing effort in this regard. Now, Japan started to import import workforce from overseas, which is surprising. In the past, Japanese government brought, when there was a labor shortage, they brought people or only for the Japanese living overseas. So, because there are many Japanese living in Brazil, almost 2 million Japanese, because they left Japan in early 20th century and they settled in Brazil. So in 1980s, Japanese government brought only those people to work in Japan. However, they realized very quickly that it doesn't work. Okay? The reason why they brought this overseas Japanese from Brazil who left Japan already more than 2-3 generations ago. Okay? The reason was because they are Japanese, so they will not disturb this homogeneous social environment. However, very quickly, they realized that this is totally different from what they expected. First of all, the people who were brought, the Japanese people who were brought from Brazil, the Japanese people living in Japan, they thought they are Japanese. No. When they faced each other, they were shocked. Both Japanese in Japan and those Brazilian Japanese, they were also shocked. Because for Brazilian Japanese, they thought they were coming back to their homeland, their ancestral homeland. Okay, but when they encountered the Japanese, they very quickly realized, oh my goodness, I am not Japanese. And also the Japanese, they realized, oh my goodness, these guys are not Japanese at all. Okay, because people change. Okay, so now this is a very interesting question. So, now in Brazil, everyone knew that he or she was Japanese because other Brazilians, they look different from Brazilian people who are mostly European and African descendant. And so they thought, oh, he's a Japonês in Portuguese, which means Japanese. So the Japanese descendant, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, they also know, oh, I am Japanese. However, when they came to Japan, Japanese people didn't accept them as Japanese at all, okay? And there are so many differences anyway. Their attitude, Japanese people are very quiet, they try not to disturb, but these Japanese, they were growing up in Brazil, where the culture is very open and people, talk speaking loudly and so on. So it was a huge cultural shock. Now imagine then, what should you do when suddenly in one overnight, until yesterday, you thought you were Japanese. But this morning you realized, oh, I am not Japanese. What will happen then? What happened was you have a choice of your identity. Now, because you deny and you know that you are not Japanese at all, then now you have a choice. So what should I be? Great majority of them, they chose Brazil. They realized, actually, I'm not Brazilian. So what they did was, because now from today, I'm a Brazilian. So what do? I want to express my Brazilianness. How? Through cultural expression. And what is a cultural expression for Brazilians? At festival, samba dance. But these Japanese, they never learned samba dance because their parents always say, don't be like other, dirty Brazilians, okay? Because you are Japanese. But they never learned. But in Japan, they wanted to express their Brazilianness, which was not easy, okay? But anyway, this is a shocking and which taught both Japanese and Brazilian Japanese who came to Japan, taught them racial homogeneity is not fixed, okay? And you can change. So that's why very quickly the Japanese government changed this immigration policy, and now they are accepting Indonesians and Vietnamese and other people as well. Okay, so anyway, my answer to this question, sorry that I gave this long answer, but because this is a very interesting story and everyone should learn, and because it is related to reconciliation eventually, okay? Even if people may look different, they're also same human being. They simply have a different identity because they grew up in different environment. And now, these Japanese and Koreans started to realize that foreigners or people with different religions, like Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, they are all the same human being. So these countries started to accept. Now, today, about 2.5% of people living in Japan, they are immigrants. Okay, so 2.5%, which is surprising if it was not easy to imagine in 10 years or 20 years ago. South Korea is even more shocking. Nearly 4% of people living in South Korea, they are foreigners. They came to Korea, South Korea, mostly to work or to marry Korean people. Okay? So these countries are changing ethnically, racially, becoming more diverse. Okay, so that's the answer. And I'm sorry that I'm going over the time, but North Korea, South Korea, yes, it will be very difficult. It is not easy. Why? Because if we think only racially, because they are same people, not only they are same people, it's the same family. Nearly 10 million South Koreans have family members in North Korea. Okay, so it should be theoretically very easy. However, no, it's much better. South Koreans can live much better with Indonesians or Filipinos or Russians or Mongolians, Uzbeks who are coming to South Korea to work with, okay? Because they all agree to certain political values, democracy, human rights, and so on. But it will be extremely difficult to live with someone who doesn't share the same political ideology. Okay? So I think it is extremely difficult. That's internal reason. But externally, Germany is not bordered with Russia. Okay, Germany and Russia is separate, and Russia used to be the most powerful country together with America, but after 1990s, the Russian power declined very much. And now today, Russia is still very powerful country and important country, but not like before. However, North Korea has a border with China. Soviet Union, the Russia could not disturb German unification. I'm sure they wished if they could, but they couldn't. Okay. However, China need North Korea as a buffer. Okay. So the existence of China and China's becoming powerful country, like today, it will make things very, very difficult. Okay. I'm so sorry that that's only these two questions I understood fully, so I could not answer the other questions. But if you, okay, so there are some, the chat box, the questions are. I'm sorry, so can someone read this question for me, if this is a question?
Yeah, most of the question you already answered. Because,
okay.
The answer is written.
Maybe the Desita's question that Mr. Song not answer yet.
Yes. So what was the question?
Pardon me. I will help. Which one?
Okay, Desita question, right?
This one.
This
What about bowing?
Oh, bowing.
Bowing, the term bowing. What is the original name of term for bowing in China, Japan, and Korea? And what is the function of bowing in everyday life?
Oh, I see. Yeah, bowing is the same as shaking hands today, which came from Western culture. Okay, but this bowing is different in China and Korea and Japan. Not only today, but also depending on which period. Bowing is, as I say, it is a greeting. It is a shaking hand, same as shaking hand. But Chinese are the least people who would shake hand. They would bow a little bit, but they do shake hands with the foreigners. But between Chinese, it's relatively rare. But shaking hand is very common in South Korea and in Japan. But before this shaking hand, the bowing was the only way to show your respect, especially when you met someone first. And also, each time, whenever you meet someone who is higher than you in terms of social status and so on, then you would show this big bow to show your respect, and also same for your parents and so on. The names are different in all because they use different. These three countries, languages are not same. Right? The Chinese language is drastically, as I say, it's totally different from Chinese, from Korean and Japanese. Okay.
Okay. I think this is the conclusion from Ms. Dr. Song, Nadia.
Bagaimana Ibu? Maaf, kurang terdengar suaranya.
Nadia, itu tadi jawaban Dr. Song. Bisa dilanjutkan untuk sesi penutupan.
All right, thank you, Dr. Song, for your answer, and I convey thank you so much for all participants who has given question. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have finally reached the end of the event. I would like to give applause and saying a big thank you to our speaker, Dr. Changzoo Song, for the knowledge that has been provided, and of course, they are so conveyed to our participants in today's class. Okay, Dr. Changzoo Song, I ask the presenter, are sorry if there are mistakes. It's been a pleasure being with all of today, and I wish you have a good day ahead. Okay, before ending our meeting with Dr. Song, let's take a picture with Dr. Song, and all participants are expected to open the camera.
Okay, excuse me, Dr. Song, could you please stop your share screen?
Yes, I will. Yeah, that's right.
So we will picture together first.
Yeah.
Teman-teman, silakan on cam dulu. Ya, silakan, Nadia.
All right. Okay, slide 1. 1, 2, 3. Next slide. 1, 2, 3. Next slide again. 1, 2, 3. And then next slide again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the last slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much. Nice to meet you, Dr. Changzoo Song. Thanks for the material you have given to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to nice to meet you. Thank you, Dr. Changzoo Song.
Thank you, Dr. Song.
Thank you so much. And once again, we express many thanks to Dr. Changzoo Song for delivering very useful material. Then forwarded it to Dr. Song. If you have other interests or activities, you can leave the room soon.
Okay, Dr. Song, thank you very much for your lecture today, and seeing many questions from the students. It's very interesting, your lecture. And because we have another session announcement for students, so if you have other activity, you can please you can leave the Zoom first.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope that I will see you next year in Semarang.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I love
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah, I love lumpia Semarang. I want to
okay. Please welcome.
China also, Korea.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama.
Sampai jumpa.
Sampai ketemu. Sampai ketemu.
Monggo, Mbak Ilis.
Baiklah, terima kasih mahasiswa yang hari ini hadir. Terima kasih atas antusiasnya. Saya catat ada 9 pertanyaan. Saya harap ini jadi semacam pertemuan yang akan memberi semangat untuk pertemuan-pertemuan berikutnya. Apapun pertanyaan Anda terhadap para pemateri itu menjadi menjadi bukti bahwa Anda punya perhatian pada materi yang disampaikan oleh para narasumber. Oke. Ini saya kok agak kesulitan membuka presensi ya. Bisakah masing-masing komting? Di sini ada 100, sebentar ya, saya coba lagi, soalnya dari tadi saya sulit membuka